you're going to end up in jail. It was a simple wager. Let's develop the country economically and let's not mess with politics. And it actually worked. And whereas communist parties all over Eastern Europe fell, the Soviet Union fell apart, the only communist parties that survived were North Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba. Everything else crashed and burned. But China thrived. And it began to develop this new and very interesting kind of state capitalism, authoritarian capitalism, Leninist capitalism, whatever you would like to call it. And you saw hints of this in the Olympics. I mean, this masterful but very tightly controlled system, which really gets things done. And I'll come back to this because flag that statement really gets things done because also it is able to deliver. And we want to revisit how America's doing on that front because in finally analyzing the playing field and which model works, that's the critical question. So you go to China today, unlike when I first went there, 1975, and you travel thousands of miles on these really beautifully made highways, freeways. You know, not only well constructed now, there was a period when the construction was very shoddy, very bad, 10, 15 years ago. Now it's excellent. And they're landscaped. Either side you'll find green belts of trees. There'll be roses, bushes, not just heaped with garbage the way freeways in America are. Beautiful. Every single city in China now has a new stunning airport. Do you know how many miles of high-speed rail the United States has? 0. It has a kind of a little bit faster speed rail that goes from Boston to New York to Washington. But, the trains are bucking and weaving and swaying, and they never get over 150 miles an hour, and the cell phone service doesn't work. And, in China, they have now close to 6,000 miles. You see tunnels. You see bridges, you see buildings. What you see is a country doing what America did in the 1950s, which is laying down infrastructure. And it's happened with such rapidity. It's spellbinding. It's so much so that I find it's impossible for me to get around Beijing any longer. And I used to know the city, but it's all changed. This has its bad aspects too. They've torn down a lot of the traditional neighborhoods. But you just can't recognize any place anymore. First of all, they made a fatal error in the early 70s. They tore down the magnificent wall that used to surround the old city of Beijing. This was a wall that was as wide as Park Avenue on the top with these magnificent gates. And now only 2 of these gates survive. And they tore it down. And they put a ring road in its place. It was a great tragedy for China. But it was the beginning of the creation of this infrastructure of modernity. If you look at figures of steel production, cement production, aluminum, plate glass, all of these things, China is way out ahead of anyone else in the world. If you look at where we buy our things, where our things come from, go to Walmart. Try to find something not made in China. I play a game with my kids, let's see who can find something not made in China. It's impossible. I mean, you would starve and freeze and die if you decided not to buy things made in China. But of course, there's a downside to that too. Because while China is developed so dynamically, and developed this export economy, which has made it a powerhouse in the world. It has also become reliant on that export economy, which means that when the United States stops buying, or Europe, big economic problems for China, as we've seen in the recent economic crisis. But it also means that we, Americans, export all our jobs, become addicted to things made cheaply elsewhere. And the most important aspect of the Sino-U.S. relationship in terms of this new sort of trade balance is that we don't save any money. Whereas the rate of savings in China has been about 40 to 45%. You know what the rate of savings, at least until the economic crisis in the last year or so, do you know what it is in New York, in the United States? Who wants to guess? What? It can be negative, but 0 to 1 is where it hovers. So what this means is, in this new relationship that grows out of this new dynamism in China, this new ability to manufacture not just low-quality goods now, but increasingly higher-quality goods, is they export to us. We borrow money from them. They buy our treasury bills. We run our credit cards through the roof and buy their stuff. And then the money goes back to China. And then since it's in hard currency and they don't have a convertible currency, they send the money back to America to buy more American debt, more treasury bonds, and so we can buy more junk. So this is it's like two junkies, you know, each on a different substance. China is addicted to exporting abroad, and we are the biggest market, and we are addicted to buying it and borrowing their money to keep buying it. Now, China wants to lend us the money because it has nowhere to put their money, their foreign currency, and it also wants us to keep buying. Keeps employment, keeps stability in China. And we are addicted to consumption, and so we're happy as long as the debt was cheap and easy to come by to just keep buying and running our credit cards up. But we've come to a place where you know, that dysfunctional relationship has really, it can't continue. So Americans now are out of jobs. They're starting to save more. And China, on its hand, has learned that it has to begin to develop its own domestic consumption economy so that it isn't so reliant on export. So this is a curious kind of aspect of this new dynamism, that Chinese goods have to go someplace. Of course, there are many very deleterious aspects of this new dynamism that's seen China, you know, have roughly 10% growth rate over the last decade. It's unequaled in history. Japan's is 0 to 1. Ours is maybe in a good year 2 to 3, maybe a little higher. And China's just ripping along with 10%. So what are the downsides for China? Well, one incredibly deleterious effect of this high-speed growth is, of course, environmental degradation. And I see there are a number of Chinese students here, faculty. I mean, you will certainly know about that. You'll certainly know about the air pollution if you're in provincial towns, about water pollution, or if you're in the coastal regions. Tremendous problems with toxic wastewater in rivers being used as irrigation, and then soil becoming toxic, the deforestation of the country, although recently they've had a very effective and massive campaign to reforest China. But the overuse of resources, depletion of fertility of soil, a lack of water resources for agriculture, all of these things are extremely serious. And China is working hard to remedy it, but the problem is it is addicted to growth. And the Chinese Communist Party, its legitimacy doesn't derive from elections. It doesn't derive from, you know, any religious base or any of the other things that governmental legitimacy can come from. It comes from economic success. It has to keep this growth rate going, or it will have a lot of unhappy people. And it will have instability, the thing it fears most. You have to remember that in China, in the last 10, 15 years, we have witnessed the largest migration in human history by a long shot, and that is peasants from the